Ninth inning, Chapter 95. That night, it looked like Hope would never get a chance to bat. His home run count was approaching the unlikely, unbelievable, unimaginable, and unheard of number, 180. If he kept this up for a few more seasons, they'd have to add a whole new wing to the Hall of Fame. Only Hope knew that this was to be his first and last season playing professional ball. For the Bengals, that is. After being walked 3 times and with the Bengals tied going into the bottom of the ninth inning, there was no way on God's green earth that the opposing pitcher was going to give Hope anything to swing at. An intentional walk was called for, and the first pitch sailed several yards wide of the plate to the awaiting catcher. The next pitch did the same thing as the hometown crowd delightfully booed. The third pitch was an awkward throw that actually bounced before reaching the catcher's mitt and skittered all the way to the backstop. If there had been a runner on base, he could have maybe advanced 2 whole bases. While the catcher, standing far behind the plate, the pitcher lobbed what was supposed to be a ball 4 high in the air above batter and umpire, but not above Hope. With a standing leap of at least 5 feet, maybe 50, Hope sprung into the air and slapped that poor baseball like it had just insulted somebody's mother. Sailing higher and higher, the ball seemed to float forever in the night sky, and then, as if it were merely a feather, the lazy pop fly softly plopped into the outstretched mitt of a newly minted fan for life, sitting in the 3rd row behind the right field wall with all her friends from the hopeful Detroiters Daycare Center. The crowd exploded as Hope sailed around the bases, pausing only momentarily to wink at the right field stands before jumping into the player pile awaiting him at home. Chapter 96. By now, Neil Rubin's columns were Pulitzer Prize worthy. His comic strip was equally engaging. More and more people started to notice that they augmented each other. What Joe Louis said in Milford, Neil Rubin expanded upon in his columns, and vice versa. He was tapping out his latest treatise, not sure where it would appear, the column or the comic, when his phone rang. It was a woman named Venus inviting him to lunch with her and her boyfriend. Nielsen's social calendar was fuller than full, but he also loved lunching. It was getting onward toward 1 p.m., and his stomach instantly grumbled. "Sure, why not? It's that new place in the Flatiron Building, right?" he asked Venus over the phone. "I didn't think it was open yet." "They're making special arrangements for us," she answered. 10 minutes later, Neil walked into the mostly abandoned restaurant and literally bumped into Bald Mikey and a guy Neil had written about earlier in the year, Greg Mudge from Mudgie's Deli. The pair were carrying an enormous salad bowl and a pair of those large, outlandish wooden fork and spoon sets that used to appear on cheesy restaurant walls in the 1970s. It didn't actually take both of them to carry it. They just wanted to emphasize that this was a really big salad. "Welcome, Mr. Rubin. Won't you join us for lunch?" asked Greg. At the table, he met the woman he spoke with on the phone and her boyfriend, baseball's future manager of the year. Chapter 97. There were a lot of things for future columns and comic strips said that day. Neil Rubin was great at weaving the everyday into his words, but the most interesting thing to him was a conversation that went pretty much verbatim like this. Venus asked the table, "Do you know how much of the universe is made up of things that we can measure? You know, how much is made up of good old, top-grade, genuine matter? The stuff on the periodic table of elements, hydrogen, helium, oxygen, and the rest?" Greg Mudge answered, "Oh, that stuff. You mean how much of the universe is made up of measurable things?" Willie Palmer jumped in. "You got it. That's the question. How much of everything is made up of everything?" Neil answered, "I'd have to say about 100%. Either Venus or Willie responded, "Okay, so you'd say the universe is made up 100% of things we know and can measure." Mikey and Mudgie responded, "Yep," in unison. "Try more like 4%, said a voice from the table behind them. It belonged to a familiar person nobody knew had been listening or even in attendance. No, it wasn't Sparky. He can't talk. But if you would have asked him, he probably could have found a way to tell you the answer, too. Chapter 98. Back at the newspaper, now on screaming royal deadline, Neil looked up the 4% comment. He was astounded to learn that scientists, both quantum and astrophysicists, agreed that only 4% of the universe was made of matter. They called the rest dark energy or dark matter. Does the rest not matter? He wondered, and then tapped out another gem in the space of about 9 minutes. Chapter 99. Hope's final pitching record for the regular season was 36-0. Surprisingly, other pitchers had way more wins than that. Old Hoss Radburn had 59 wins back in 1884 for the Providence Grays. He was a slacker the previous year with only 48 wins. Old Hoss is most famous, though, for being the first person ever photographed flipping off the photographer. Surely others did so, but they just weren't captured on film. Pitchers from the Brown Stockings, the White Stockings, the Blue Stockings, and even the Red Stockings had more wins in the 1800s. If your stockings had colors, chances are you'd win 40 or more games. If your stockings were normal, but your uniforms were colorful, well, that was okay too. Late 1800s pitchers for the Blues, the Maroons, the Grays, and the Reds all had dozens of wins. The Brooklyn Trolley Dodgers, the Brooklyn Bridegrooms, the Boston Beaneaters, and the creatively named Rochester Rochesters all had ace pitchers on their staffs too. It was seemingly the golden age of pitching. Further examination reveals, however, that in those days they used just one baseball throughout the game. In later innings, it was scuffed up enough so that practically every pitch acted like a spitball, dodging and weaving all the way along its merry journey to the plate. Not only was it scuffed up, the dang thing got dirtier and dirtier, thus far more invisible to the hitter in the batter's box, standing there without a helmet. To round things out, the pitcher's mound was much higher then. Can you imagine what it must have been like for players of that era, with an ornery pitcher whipping a dirty, scuffed baseball at them from a mound much higher than today? All games were played during the day, too, so as the evening set in, visibility got even worse. Amazingly, only one professional baseball player was ever killed by a thrown pitch. That was Ray Chapman in 1920. He played for Cleveland. Chapter 100. Galligan's Island was now running in the paper every day. Galligan had hit her stride. With the help of Farina and an unknown emailer, she was compiling an impressive photo column featuring then and now shots. Like Scott Struzani's famous Common Ground book, where a family farm turns into a suburban subdivision, Galligan was able to show what Detroit buildings and lots looked like a few years earlier and what they look like now. Somehow, Farina and the unknown emailer were able to pinpoint previous pictures she'd shot of derelict buildings, blocks, or alleyways in the city, and then point her toward those places today. Many of the places she couldn't even remember photographing. Perhaps she had just swung by them on the way to or from an assignment and was captivated by the light or the urban decay it represented. Regardless, when she went back to these areas, they always looked renewed or showed the promise of things to come. What were once fabulous ruins were now fantastic possibilities. Her mastery of lighting was obvious, as was her dedication towards shooting the scenes at the best time of day. She remembered reading about early National Geographic photographers, and up to present day, in fact, who only shot pictures in the early morning or late evening during magic hour. Photography, photojournalism even, was once again fun for her. Chapter 101. It wasn't a sports bar, or even a sports-themed restaurant that opened downtown right before the World Series. But on each table, for now anyway, there was an officially sanctioned baseball centerpiecing the exotic condiments. The salt didn't come from underneath Detroit. Those salt mines had closed down long ago. But sea salt, lovingly dried in pans by Scottish fishermen from the Inner Hebrides, sat with artisanal vinegar expertly made by aging hippies along Detroit's former cast corridor. The Mississippi mud-rubbed professional baseball wasn't to be used or spread on the hand-cut potatoes organically grown in small suburban Ferndale lots. Nevertheless, patrons palmed and rolled around each table's balls in their hands almost as lovingly as Sparky played with his own balls. That still makes you giggle just a little bit, doesn't it?